Welcome to Miss Retro Reads. We're continuing with The Hardy Boys and the Missing Chums. Chapter 12, Into the Cave. Frank Hardy bent over the wheel. "I'm going closer," he said. "We'll make absolutely sure of this." He altered the course of the boat so that it would intercept the other craft at the speed they were going. Then he turned up his coat collar and drew his cap lower over his eyes. "If it's the same boat, and if the same men are in it, we should be safe enough as long as they don't recognize us. They saw us that day, but they've never seen the sleuth. We'll get as close to them as we can." But the other craft had increased its speed. It was a powerful boat, and a high curl of foam now rose from its bows as it plunged through the waves in a rapid flight towards the mainland in the distance. The roar of the engine was borne to the boys' ears on the breeze. "We're going to lose them," muttered Frank. "They're too far ahead of us, unless we want to cut in and meet them right near the land." "That will only make them suspicious." "Yeah, I guess we'd better let them go." Still, he did not give up the attempt just then, opening the throttle so that the sleuth was racing along at top speed. But the other boat had the advantage and cut across their course with a quarter of a mile to spare. Joe gazed through the binoculars, striving to identify the two men. "No use," he remarked at last. "The fellow at the wheel is turned away from us, and the other man is bending down in the boat so I can't see his face." "Is it the same boat?" "I can't be positive, but I think so. It certainly looks very much like it." "I'm almost sure. Of course, there might be lots of other motorboats just like it, but I've got a hunch that it's the same craft." "What would it be doing in Black Snake Island? There's no doubt that it came from there." "That's for us to find out. We'll let them go on the mainland, and then we'll circle back and go up the other side of the island." In a short time the other craft disappeared from view, entering a small cove some distance down the coast, and Frank turned their boat about and headed towards Black Snake Island again. They approached it from the seaward side and drew in as close to the island as they dared. The rocky bluffs were lonely and foreboding, seemed to offer no available landing place. "We'll go right around. If Chet and Biff are there, we should be able to see their boat or fire or some sign of life," said Frank half questioningly to his brother. "After seeing that other motorboat, I'm pretty sure we won't see any signs of them at all. I'm pretty well satisfied that those men kidnapped them and brought them there. And if they did, we may be sure they will be hidden well. We'll circle the island anyway, and if we don't see anything, we'll land and make a search of the place." But making a circuit of the island took longer than the boys expected. Black Snake Island was bigger than it had first appeared. It was almost a mile in length and correspondingly wide, a great swampy tract of forbidding marsh at one end, rising to higher ground, and desolate rocks at the other. On the swampy side there was sinister little creeks, dead bushes half inundated, logs floating about in the black water. Frank and Joe caught glimpses of triangular black heads forging slowly through the water here and there. "The black snakes!" Frank exclaimed. Once the motorboat passed within a few yards of one of these black reptiles. Fascinated, the boys watched the ugly black head that projected above the surface, and they could see the long, sinuous body writhing beneath the water as the snake swam towards the fetid marsh. "There must be hundreds of them on that island. They're dangerous, too. I've read about them. A bite from one of them means you're finished." There were fewer snakes on the rocky side of the island, and after they had made the circuit without seeing any sign of human life, the boys decided to make a landing. "Seeing that motorboat leaving there makes me believe someone is around," declared Frank. "I won't be satisfied until I find out for sure." We won't stay here all night. It all depends. If we're satisfied that the island is deserted, we'll leave. But if we think we haven't searched thoroughly enough, we'll stay and hunt around again tomorrow. It'll take a few hours to give this place a thorough going over. How about the snakes? Won't it be dangerous staying here all night? Oh, well, we'll find some place where they can't get us. If the worst comes to worst, we can anchor the boat and stay in it. This decided, after some search, they discovered a small cove, well protected from the sea, that appeared to offer a good landing place. The cove had a narrow entrance between the rocks, but widened out into a small lagoon, with water deep enough to enable the boys to bring their boat up close to the wide shelf of the rock. They anchored the sloop and then clambered up onto the rock. Feels good to stand on solid footing again, Joe commented. I'll say it does. Well, let's be starting. Which way shall we go? Is it to be north or south? It doesn't matter much. To start with, we'll nose around among those rocks for a while. The sun blazed on the bare crags as the boys picked their way over the rocks and boulders. Away in the interior, they could see the waving tops of trees in the steamy marshes. But for the time being, they contented themselves with exploring the rocky end of the island. It was quite barren, and it appeared that no human being had ever set foot upon the place. You can't blame them either, said Frank, when Joe had remarked on this fact. It's certainly not a place where I'd care to build my happy home. After about an hour of desultory search, they came upon something that proved conclusively that human beings had indeed been there before them, and not long previously at that. Charred embers and a crude fireplace built of rocks in a little hollow told the boys that someone had preceded them. We're on the track of something, declared Frank, as he examined the remains of the fire. This blaze was built here not long ago. Someone has camped here. He circled the rock, which dipped towards a patch of undergrowth and luxuriant grass. And here's a trail, he exclaimed. It was merely a faint depression in the deep grass, but it proved that more than one person had passed that way before. The trail wound along through the verdure away from the shore, leading towards the interior of the island. Well, if someone else has gone this way, we can follow the path too, Joe remarked. Got your gun? Yes. Frank patted his hip. Both boys had provided themselves with revolvers before leaving home. They were not adept with firing arms, but the nature of their mission had prompted them to come prepared for any emergency. Fenton Hardy had a collection of weapons in his study, all trophies of his various cases, and the Hardy boys had each taken a small and efficient-looking automatic pistol for protection, with permission of their mother. They struck out along the faint trail, the grass rustling about their feet. The green thicket loomed ominously before them, and the heat became more intense. Frank was striding along in advance, gazing at the thicket ahead, when he suddenly came aware of disturbance in the grass almost at his feet. Some sixth sense warned him of danger, that strange tickling of the spine, man's instinctive reaction to the presence of a hidden peril made him look down. Immediately in front of him lay a huge black snake. The reptile was easily 5 feet in length, and as the boy leapt back, he could hear a prolonged hissing. The snake writhed and twisted, and its head came into view from amid the grass. The red tongue flickered wickedly. Frank saw that the snake was coming directly at him. He leapt to one side, at the same time snatching his automatic from his hip pocket. He had not time to aim, but he pressed the trigger and pumped 2 shots in the direction of the reptile. The snake stopped dead, and then swiftly began to coil itself up in readiness to strike. Not a word had been spoken. Frank had blundered back against Joe, who was unaware of the cause of his brother's sudden alarm. He quickly grasped the situation, however, and looked about him. Close at hand, almost hidden by the grass, was a heavy stick. He bent and quickly snatched it up. "Quick," said Frank, taking it from him. He brandished the stick and brought it down with terrific force upon the snake. The first blow did not kill the reptile, although it rendered it helpless. The hissing continued. The scarlet tongue flickered like flame. Then the boy brought the stick down again. It crushed in the evil black head. A few spasmodic wriggles, and the snake lay still. "Whew!" breathed Frank, stepping back. "What a big brute he is!" The boys inspected the reptile more closely, reprising a shiver of repulsion as they saw the sinuous, scaly body laying there in the grass. "We'd better get away from here, path or no path. Where there's one snake, there are more. Its mate is probably close by." The boys retreated until they gained the comparative safety of the rocks. "It's lucky for me you saw that stick," declared Frank. "He was coming right for me, and the automatic wasn't much use. He was moving so quickly I couldn't have shot him. He was stirred up and angry, too. I guess I must have disturbed his morning nap. We'll stick to the rocks for a while. I guess it's time enough to go nosing around the interior when we've finished with the outside of the island." The boys descended a rocky slope that led into a small bay protected from the sea by a black reef. There were no snakes in sight as they skirted the shore, and then they came upon a well-beaten path leading up the side of the cliff. The path wound about among the rocks, seemingly in an aimless fashion, now diverging towards the shore and now bringing them further inland. They followed it doggedly, however, convinced that it must have an ending somewhere, and that the termination would give them some clue as to the people who had used the trail before. The trail at length brought them in front of a huge black opening in the rocks. It was a cave over 12 feet in height, dark, gloomy, and forbidding. "Now what?" asked Joe. Frank glanced at his brother. "Shall we go?" "You can't scare me. If you'll go, I'll go. The trail leads here. Other people must have gone in there. If they can do it, so can we. Lead on." Frank picked up a heavy stick laying among the rocks near the entrance of the cave. "You never know when we'll run into snakes around here," he remarked. "It's just as well that we're ready for them." Joe hunted around until he too found a club that would be serviceable in the event of their encountering more of the reptiles. He patted his hip to make sure that the automatic was still in his pocket. "All set?" "All set." Frank stepped forward and entered the mouth of the cave. Joe followed at his heels. For several yards the cave was illuminated by the light from outside, but as they went on the gloom became deeper until at length they were faced by impenetrable darkness. Frank had brought with him a pocket flashlight, and he switched it on. A wide ring of light shone before them, showing the damp rock walls ahead. They stepped forward cautiously. The floor of the cave sloped upward, but the great opening in the rock was of such extent that the ceiling was scarcely visible above in the light of the flash. "I don't know where we're going, but we're on our way," said Frank, as they toiled on up over the rough rocks. His voice echoed, and it was flung back and forth from the massive walls. The flashlight showed him at length the place where the floor dipped abruptly to a steep slope, although there was still a wide ledge at the top, sufficiently wide for them to proceed. He turned the light down that slope, but could see nothing save inky blackness. The boys proceeded slowly along the ledge. There were numerous pebbles and small rocks underfoot. It was difficult to see them, because Frank was obliged to keep the flashlight centered on the trail ahead, and they were obliged to proceed cautiously in order to keep their footing. This circumstance led to disaster. Unwittingly, Frank stepped on a small rock that rolled suddenly beneath his feet. He staggered, stepped on another rock that slipped to one side, and then he sprawled forward, the flashlight spinning from his hand. The light clattered among the rocks ahead, and darkness fell about them. "What's the matter?" asked Joe, alarmed. "It's all right. I just slipped." Frank got to his feet. "I lost the light. It fell down here somewhere. Hang on to the back of my coat, and I'll go ahead and get it." Joe caught at the back of his coat, and Frank slowly felt his way forward in the deep blackness. Suddenly he lurched ahead, his feet sinking in a treacherous mass of sand and gravel. Wildly he strove to retain his footing, but the effort was in vain. He felt himself slipping, and as he uttered an instinctive cry of warning to Joe, he was flung into space. Joe, who had been clinging to Frank's coat, was wrenched to one side. He stepped forward, grasping for his brother. Then he too went hurling into the darkness. They pitched down amid a clattering of rocks and pebbles. Then, with an icy shock, they plunged into the deep pool of water. Chapter 13. The Four Men. Profound darkness enveloped the Hardy Boys. The blackness of the icy pool was no blacker than the darkness of the air above. Frank rose spluttering to the surface, unharmed by his fall, and as he splashed about, his first thought was for his brother. "Joe!" he shouted. "Joe!" There was no answer except from the echoes and the rocks shouting mockingly back at him, "Joe! Joe! Joe!" growing fainter and fainter until they died away to a mere whisper. Then there was a splashing almost at his side, as his brother rose to the surface of the pool and struck out blindly. "Are you all right?" called Frank. "I'm all right," gasped Joe. "Keep beside me. We'll try to find the edge of this pool." Frank swam forward, groping ahead, until at length his fingers touched the smooth rock at the water's edge. But the rock was almost vertical, and it was so smooth and slippery that there was no hope of a handhold. He swam to one side, feeling the rock as he went. Despair seized him as he found that the rock still rose steeply above. If they had fallen into a circular pit, they were doomed. In pitch darkness, then, they battled their way about the border of the pool until at length Frank's searching fingers closed about a rocky projection that seemed to indicate a change in the surface of the cliff. He was right. There was a small ledge at this point, and he was able to drag himself up on it. There was room enough for both of them, and he turned and grasped Joe's hand, dragging him up on the rock after him. They crouched there in dripping clothes, breathing heavily after their exertion. Presently Frank began to grope upward, still examining the surface of the cliff. He found that it sloped gradually, that the surface was rough, with a number of footholds. "I think we can climb," he told Joe. "It's mighty dark, but if we can ever get back on that main ledge again, we'll be all right." He said this because he judged that the place that they had found was on the side of the pool that lay towards the entrance of the cave. If they had emerged on the other side and had regained the ledge, they would have been in another dilemma, because they might not have been able to cross the treacherous breach in the trail that had proved Frank's downfall. Frank groped his way up the face of the slope. He dug his foot against the first ledge and raised himself, clutching at a projection in the rock above. Then, scrambling for a further foothold, he managed to draw himself up. Here the slope became even more gradual, and by pressing himself close against the rock, he was able to crawl on up. until at length he came to a flat shelf of rock that he recognized as the main ledge that they had followed from the entrance to the cave. "I'm up," he shouted back to Joe, and then he heard a scraping on the rocks, as his brother also began the ascent. Joe made the climb without difficulty, and in a short time rejoined his brother on the ledge. "I guess we'd better go back," Frank said. "This cave seems to lead to nothing but trouble. We're better off out in the open. Is the flashlight lost?" "Yeah, I think it smashed when it fell against the rocks. Anyway, I'm not going back to look for it in the dark. That ledge was treacherous enough, even when we had the light." Step by step, proceeding cautiously, the Hardy Boys made their way back towards the entrance to the cave. Their return journey was not so precarious because the entrance to the cave shone before them as a vague gray light and guided them on their way. They reached the entrance at last and again stepped out into the bright sunlight. At first they were dazzled after the blackness of the cave. "First of all, we're going to dry our clothes," declared Frank, as he hunted around among the rocks for sticks that might serve for firewood. "I'm soaking wet." "Me too. Thank goodness it's warm out here. I'm glad I carried the matches in this waterproof case, or we'd have been out of luck." They managed to find enough sticks and dry leaves to enable them to start a fire. They were standing about the fire drying themselves before the blaze. This occupied some time, and it was mid-afternoon before they were able to proceed. They had taken some sandwiches with them in the boat, and they made a lunch of these while their clothes dried before the fire. "Where do we go from here?" inquired Joe. "Anywhere but in that cave," his brother replied. "I think we might as well follow along the shore again. One thing is certain. There have been people on this island, and not long ago. Why—" Suddenly he stopped. "Listen!" They remained quiet. Frank had heard what seemed to him like a distant shout, and as they listened he heard it again. It was a faint call that echoed among the rocks far ahead of them. The boys looked at one another. Frank pressed his fingers against his lips as a caution to remain silent. Then from among the rocks above them they heard another shout, clearer this time, evidently in response to the one they had heard first. The first shout was again repeated, and then silence fell. "That proves it," said Frank quietly. "There are people on this island. They're calling to each other. Sounds like it. We'll head down in the direction of that place that first shout came from. It was someone calling in response, else back up here among the rocks." They went on in the direction from which the first call had been heard. For over 10 minutes they proceeded carefully among the rocks until finally Frank caught sight of a curly column of smoke against the sky. "A campfire," he said. To approach this fire it was necessary for them to change their course and go up through the shrubbery towards higher ground. They moved slowly because they did not want to be seen until they had ascertained whether the strangers were friends or foe, and they were strongly suspicious that it might prove to be the latter. A moving object ahead caught Frank's eye, and he crouched down in the bushes, motioning to Joe. They peeped through the undergrowth, and before they could see a flat surface of rock, in the center of which a fire had been built. 3 men were about the fire. 2 of these were sprawled in the grass at the verge of the rock, while one was standing beside the fire, stirring the contents of the pot that hung from a tripod above the blaze. It was this man that had first caught Frank's eye. The strangers had not noticed the Hardy Boys' approach. "We'll crawl up closer," whispered Joe. Frank nodded. They began to make their way quietly forward through the bushes. Frank, who was in the lead, kept a wary eye for snakes and also kept watching the 3 men about the fire. The boys approached, demanded the utmost caution. Foot by foot they made their way closer to the trio about the blaze until at last they were so close they could distinguish what the men were saying. Also, they could distinguish the faces of the speakers. They were the three men who had been in the motorboat the day the storm in Barmont Bay. Although the boys had expected this, they could scarcely restrain murmurs of astonishment. This proved definitely that the motorboat they had seen that morning was the same motorboat that had followed them in Barmont Bay. The boys listened. "No answer to the letter yet, is there?" one man was asking. The fellow by the fire shook his head. "Not any answer. Oh well, we can wait." "We can't wait forever," grumbled the other. "I'm not keen on staying on this confounded island much longer." "There's lots worse places," remarked the man at his side significantly. "What do you mean?" "Jail." "Oh, I suppose so. But I wish this business would get cleared up. I want to get back to the city and have a good time." "We all want to get back. But there's no use rushing things," said the man standing by the fire. "We'll be well paid for our waiting. Do you think we've made a mistake? I tell you, it's been worrying me. If we've gummed up this job by doing a trick like that, I'll never forgive myself." "No, there's no mistake. Don't worry about that," scoffed the man at the fire. "Didn't we look things over mighty carefully before we started?" "Yeah," admitted the other slowly. "But they keep harping on the tune all the time, and I'm beginning to think that they may be something in it." "Where's Red?" demanded the third man. "Didn't you call him?" "Yeah, I called him. This is him now. He's coming down from the grove." Suddenly Frank clutched his brother by the arm and flattened himself against the ground. A footstep sounded immediately behind them. Twigs crackled. Unobserved, a man had approached to within a few feet of them, striding silently through the deep grass. The boys remained motionless, wondering if they had been seen. For a breathless second they lay rigid in the bushes, and then the footsteps passed by within a few inches of Frank's outstretched hand. They heard his deep voice. "When did you all get back?" "Just a few minutes ago," replied the man at the fire. "We left the boat in the bay. Anything new?" "Nothing new," growled the deep voice. "The prisoners are still safe and sound." One of the men chuckled. "Have they quieted down yet?" "No," growled the newcomer. "They kicked up a big fuss all the time you were gone. Still keep saying we've made a mistake." "Mistake nothing," the men by the fire declared. "There's been no mistake about this job. They can't fool me." And we will continue this story next Wednesday. And thanks for listening to Miss Retro Reads.